This is the Guided Podcast, an interview with the fly fishing industry's top guides and brand ambassadors. On this podcast, we cover topics such as the guiding lifestyle, conservation, different fisheries globally, and gear and technology to improve your game. I'm your show host, Greg Keenan. Before we begin today's show, let's thank our sponsors. Scientific Anglers is the leader in producing the world's best fly lines for over 75 years. Scientific Anglers have set new industry standards with their SA Amplitude family of fly lines, both in technology and performance. See the difference for yourself today at scientificanglers.com. Show your show support and follow us on Instagram at Fly Fishing Insider Podcast. Now let's begin. Welcome to Guided. Today our guest, Bruce Chard. Bruce, welcome back to the show again, man.
Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure with you. Always a pleasure. Good for laughs. So last time we talked, which was on the Fly Fishing Insider podcast, you were keeping busy, and I know you had a big secret to tell that you were anxious to share, and it was just the wrong timing and whatnot. So I know now we can talk about that big secret. But before we do, where are you right now? We just talked off air, and you're in the Keys, and you're fishing. Tell us about what's going on, man.
Yeah, the fall season here in the Florida Keys is really popular for permit fishing. And of course, we also have great fall run of large tarpon that not too many people know about. They're not around as much as they are in the spring, of course, but there's definitely some fish to keep you busy. And we have a great baby tarpon fishery too that keeps us really busy this time of year. And actually, in late summer to November timeframe is probably the time frame that I get the most grand slams, where we get bonefish, permit, and tarpon all in one day. And so it's a good thing that our fishery can offer that at any day throughout the whole year. But in the fall, there's less pressure. You know, a lot of our guides in our area come from other states in the spring for the big tarpon run. Mm-hmm. So we're pretty busy and always competing for spaces during that, like the March through early June timeframe. But from like mid-July all the way through November, there's nobody here. And the hotel rates are cheaper, and the fishing is great. The weather is very stable, which is what makes the fishing usually more predictable and better. In the spring, you get cold fronts that come through, and you get velocity of wind change with the cold fronts that move through, and water temperature changes, and the fish don't seem to like that as much, and they're more fidgety. But this time of the year is great. You have nice stable weather. Of course, when a hurricane comes through, that doesn't help. But other than that, you have plenty of time to get out of the way of that, and our fishery is really great this time of the year. So we've been having some great permit fishing and bone fishing and big tarpon and little tarpon. So I've been busy for sure.
I bet you have. Hitting those grand slams. I love that. We up here, we just call it a trifactor or a hat trick. Play on hockey there, but I love the grand slam. So a bonefish, what is it? It's a bonefish, a permit, and a tarpon all in one day.
Yeah, and then we do have the chance to get a super slam when you throw a snook in there.
Oh, you're killing us. You're killing me. I can't wait till they open up those borders, buddy. I want to come down, and that's my dream, going after a grand slam. So this year's been quite the year for you, Bruce. And what I mean by that is a lot of up and downs, and you know, obviously COVID and stuff. But you joined Scientific Anglers. Like, walk us through how this all happened.
Well, I used to work with the president, Brad Beefus, with Ross Reels for over 19 years. So we had a really long relationship together, and we actually worked together when Brad first started working with SA, and helped me to design the Grand Slam fly line that they have for the tropics and saltwater. It actually won the Best of Show saltwater fly line at the Las Vegas International Fly Tackle Dealer Show when I was working with them. And what happened in the past was Orvis purchased Scientific Anglers, and a lot of things go on between different companies when they're bought out. And a lot of times it forces people to move to different companies when they really don't want to. And that kind of is what ended up happening with me at the beginning there, about 5 or 6 years ago, which then I started to work with Tim Rajeff and Airflow and design the tropical punch, Bruce Chard, saltwater fly line they had there, which once I went over there to do that, it was the top selling saltwater fly line for the entire time I was with them. And then, of course, they have been recently bought out by the Mayfly Group, and it has created another opportunity for me to move on and move back with Scientific Anglers and work with Brad again and do some great things here in the future. So I'm really excited to be back, and Brad's excited to have me back, and all the guys at SA. So I've been spending some time with them up in Midland, Michigan, and we're going to get ready to release the hounds, if you will, and we're going to do a bunch of really cool stuff here in the near future.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So sounds pretty cool. You kind of went full circle there and whatnot. So, and you're with, definitely with a good group of guys over and girls over there at SA. So Bruce, one of the things you mentioned, which is super cool, is that you've designed 2 lines. So you designed the Grand Slam, for SA. And then you also designed the Bruce Chard's, the tropical punch, right? What is it?
Yeah, the tropical punch was with Airflow when I went over to Airflow.
Correct.
Now, it originally was the Grand Slam line taper from SA.
Okay, gotcha. So it's the same thing. You're just kind of shifting it and stuff. What is it that, you got to get technical on this here for us. Why does that, how does a guide, how's a guy like you start designing lines? Where did you see the niche or the need for it? When the manufacturers, did they come to you? Walk us through how that transpired.
Well, so back in the day, probably 25 years ago or so, when I was just getting started guiding full-time heavy, I found myself, the main fly lines that we had for that time of year, saltwater lines had a longer front taper, say 6 to 8 feet long, with a smaller diameter on the end of the front taper. And then we also had lines that had long bellies, up to 45. Some of them had 50-foot long bellies. And then they had short, what I would think is a short rear taper, 8 or 10 feet long on the rear taper. And that was what we had to work with. And they were pretty close to true weight lines. So what I found what happened was a lot of times when we were going permit fishing, we're doing 2 big no-nos in casting that makes it difficult for the caster to get the line, leader, and fly layout straight, which is really important on our sport. The length of the leader, the longer the leader you have, usually makes it a little more challenging to get the line, leader, and fly layout straight, especially when you're in the hard tropical winds quite a bit. And then, of course, when you're permit fishing, a lot of times you're throwing flies that are actually fairly heavy, so they sink good, with crab patterns and stuff with epoxy on it, heavier lead eyes, all that jazz. So those are hard to get the layout straight as well and cast comfortably. So when you do both at the same time, it's a double toughie, right? You got to really make major adjustments, super fast line speed, lots of power in your cast to be able to get that line to lay out straight in the wind, especially, let alone being able to carry 50 feet of line in the air for a distance cast and then the wind's blowing as well. It's really hard. So you need a little help. Or maybe you just need to be able to fine tune your system so you're not fighting against the line, leader, and the fly and create a system that maybe works a little easier in your favor. And that's what I found myself doing every day on the skip, where my angler would show up. He would have his normal tarpon taper on a 10-weight rod for permit fishing. And the angler had a really hard time getting his leader and the fly layout straight consistently. And so what I ended up doing is cutting back the front tapers almost to nothing, because the diameter at the end of the fly line where you connect the leader, and we can talk about this in another podcast sometime if you want, because a lot of guys really seem to love the technical leader fly line taper discussion, but I'm going to give you a little bit of Yeah, we're doing it now too. Yeah. So the diameter of that front taper is really key, because the mass is what helps contain the energy. So the smaller that the diameter of the tip gets, the less energy it can hold. And when we're saltwater fly casting and 25-mile-an-hour winds in your face, you want as much energy and power in that system as you can get. And if you have a line that cannot contain the energy that you're putting into the system, then it's working against you. So what we do is we cut that front taper off. In that way, that leaves us the full belly of the line. Let's face it, when you buy a fly line, you're paying that $80 to $150 for a reason. And what you're paying for is that beautiful machined taper and diameter all the way through the line. That helps to contain and transfer energy smoothly all the way to the leader. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you're paying for, that fly line, along with the special coating and the cores and all the other hard work and design that goes into the fly line. What's that?
All the features.
Yeah. So if you don't have the right connection to your leader, and if your leader butt section is too small in diameter or not stiff enough to equal the fly line, when you have that connection there, you're going to create a hinge. Doesn't matter if you have a loop knot or a nail knot or any kind of a knot, whatever connection it is. If the diameter difference and the stiffness is too big a difference, it will hinge there. And then on top of that, that will help in throwing slack in the system on your line and won't be able to transfer energy smoothly all the way to the fly to get the layout straight and so on. So what we found was that if we cut the front taper off the fly line, we had a nice, thick, large diameter connection to the butt section of the fly line. Therefore, it transferred energy. We lost no energy through that lengthy 6 to 8 foot long front taper with a small smaller diameter tip. We didn't lose any energy through that front taper. So as the front taper gets smaller, it is designed to lose energy effectively, and then therefore hopefully leave you enough to let the leader transfer the energy smoothly to the fly. But when you have a 6 or 8 foot leader and it transfers down to a small diameter, there's not much energy left. So we need that energy in the system. So if we connect our leader system to the butt section of the leader to the end of the front taper and it's thick, like right close to the end of the belly, then that energy just dumps right into your leader. And when it dumps right into your leader, if the leader is tied correctly with the right mono to coincide with the flow of your fly line, you're going to get a system that lays out straight with ease. Then when it's blowing 25 in your face, which it is all the time, then you can hammer on it and put lots of power into your cast, and you're going to get that power to transfer all the way to the fly and lay out straight, which is huge. Not only on your presentation cast, but it's huge when you're false casting too. So a lot of guys like to take a downwind cast, right? Well, you got to get that you got to get every back cast to lay out straight as you're false casting into the wind. And even if you have a not so good setup where you have a hinging effect or a smaller, lighter leader on there and a long front taper, it's really hard to get that leader and the line to lay out straight on your back cast. Therefore, it's eating up your stroke length on your next forward cast and not giving you the ability to add as much power as you need, and therefore making it difficult to get that line leader and fly to lay out straight. So it's really important on your presentation and while you're false casting to set you up. And that's what the Grand Slam line does. It's got a short front taper with a fat connection, and that allows you to connect a good stiff butt section to that connection there at the end of the loop and have it transfer smoothly all the way to the fly. Plus, most of the time, everybody thinks that when you're saltwater fly fishing, that you have to be this super Mac Daddy 120 foot long distance caster. Well, remember that we're sight fishing here, and most of the time, most of the anglers that are doing this, they don't get to do this every day.
Yeah.
So it's really hard to walk off the airplane, get on the flats boat, and then be old Eagle-Eye Brucey on the bow right away. It's hard. So it takes time. Everybody on their last day of their fishing trip is fishing the best usually that they have on the whole trip, because the more time you do anything, you get more acclimated and be able to get more comfortable with everything. So getting used to seeing fish is a challenge, especially in the different light levels and clouds and wind angles and the choppiness of the water and the different colors of the bottom, contrast. All that stuff is huge in gaining experience, becoming a better sight fishing angler. So why that has such a big deal is most guys, they can't see more than 50 feet. So if you can make a good cast at 50 feet and get that line leader and fly to lay out straight, you're going to be able to take advantage of a very high percentage of the opportunities that you're going to get. If you have to cast at 70 or 80 feet away to a fish, if you're going to have to see it, that the conditions are right, and you see it that far away, man, it's hard to know exactly where your fly is in conjunction to where the fish is that far away. It's harder to read the fish's movements from that distance. Everything makes it a little more challenging. And then when the fish eats from that distance, there's usually enough stretch in the line leader and everything that it's hard to get a good hook set. And almost all the fish that we fish for on the flats have hard, bony, rocky type mouths. And there's not a lot of soft spots in his mouth. So you got to make sure you drill the hook home when you can. Mm-hmm. And especially from that distance, it's just not as practical as it is within 50 feet. So if you can handle 50 feet, both in your forward and your back cast, you're going to be good to go. So what I found out, that it's really hard for most anglers to cast more than 50 feet anyways, because they have to carry a lot of line in the air outside the end of their rod tip in order to get the rod to load enough to make the cast they need to make. So I found myself back in 1992, 93, 94, actually overlining the rods with an overweighted rod. So we would take an 11-weight line and put it on a 10-weight rod, or put a 10-weight line on a 9-weight rod, or whatever. And everybody that I did that to loved it. They're like, wow, man, I can feel this on a short cast. I can feel it load on my short cast now, where normally I'd have to carry 40 feet of line in the air, but if I'm only going to make a 35-foot shot over here, I don't need that much line out. So it was really hard to load a lot of the rods back then, and still to this day, with just a straight 8-weight line, with its true weight line, true grain weight line on a true grain weight rod. It was hard to do that. So I found that if you add a little extra weight to the fly line, or go up a line at the time, man, it was really easy to load that rod quick. And remember, you don't have a lot of time. If you're making shots that are quick within 30 to 50 feet all the time, you don't have time to make much false casts, right? To get the line out of the end of the rod tip, you don't have time for that.
Yeah.
So you gotta reduce your false cast as much as you can. You gotta speed up your tempo as fast as you can. So you can walk around the block, or you can jog, or you can run, or you can sprint. And ideally, if you can see the fish and you can sprint and get the fly in the water as quickly as possible, then your odds obviously go up big time. So we need to get that fly in the water as quickly as we can. No false casts if possible, as little as possible. And the only way to load the rod enough quickly to do that is to throw a little extra weight in the line. So I kind of did something. I'm like, hey guys, let's try something. I'm going to throw 5 different rods on this table, and I'm going to cover the marks up on it. And you're not going to know what kind of rod it is. I'm going to cover the label up. You're not going to know what weight it is. And I'm going to throw some reels on here, and they're all going to have different weighted lines on it. But you're not going to know what they are. And I want you to grab and try each rod with each reel and mix and match and do whatever you like, and then come up with your favorite rod and reel combo. And everybody picked the rod that was overlined. They picked a line that was overweighted on the rod, and they loved fishing it. And some of them even picked a line that was too over, but nobody picked a rod that was underlined.
Or true weight either, right?
Well, you do get a little of that. Some of the very experienced anglers that can make the adjustments and the power that's needed, because the technique is so good, because they're very experienced. They can definitely take care of business with an equal weighted line. But a lot of rods that are coming out, a lot of series rods that are coming out, they don't fish as well with an equal weighted line.
That's correct.
And they fish better with an equal weighted line. So
correct, yeah.
Everybody's different. I would encourage everybody to try a different weight. But the key thing here is the taper is really, really, really important. So remember how we said just a second ago about how it was really difficult for anglers to actually carry line in the air?
Yeah.
Well, the reason for that is at the time, when I was designing the line originally, in the early 90s, the rear taper of the fly lines were very short. They're only 6 to 8 feet long. And this is what we call the haul zone, because that section needs to be connected to your rod tip while you're false casting, because it's really difficult to transfer energy smoothly from a small diameter line up into the large diameter line. So you need to be connected with your rod tip, ideally, most of the time when you're false casting, to the rear taper. Well, if it's only 6 or 8 feet long, that's really hard to do. That doesn't give you much area to work with. So when I designed the line, I designed it with an 18-foot rear taper. So now there's very little room for mistakes. And it gives you a lot more room to be able to still stay connected with your rod tip to the rear taper of the line, therefore still able to transfer energy smoothly all the way up into the belly, and then the belly of the line and front taper take care of the rest. So these factors are all huge. And then to throw a little more in there, I made the running line just a little bit smaller in diameter. And believe it or not, that makes a huge difference on shooting line. So when you do need to take advantage of the line on a long cast, you can shoot much easier with that smaller diameter line. There's less friction and less diameter line weight going for the line on the running line when you're shooting the line through all the guides. So all those features and factors make the line extremely popular. And it's been really popular since the mid-90s. So I'm glad
absolutely.
to be back there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Bruce, just to chime in here, man. First of all, like, thanks for that huge education in line and the design on that. But just to chime in here, like, yeah, that's one of their best selling lines to this day. Like, it's what, like, so many guys fish, or so many fly fishers fish that line, and it's fantastic, and it's proven over and over and over again. So good, awesome design on that, buddy.
Well, it just works. So but it was year after year of trying to make it and learn how and what makes a difference, and because it was tiring. You work really hard, you get your angler on fish, and then they can't make the cast. But when I give them one of my rods that I've cut and chopped and whacked and made different arrangements on, and then they're able to make the cast right away, I'm going, wow, man, what's the difference here? So then it just forced me into creating and understanding that there's a line out there, taper design, that's really needed for the saltwater world. And it just works. It just works.
Yep. Why change something that works? So, hey, Bruce, let's shift here to tell us a little tarpon tip or a permit tip, some kind of saltwater tip that's going to get guys and girls on more fish.
Sure. Well, everybody certainly loves to fish for the big tarpon. And remember, we talked a little bit earlier about how this is a sight fishing game.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there's nothing like seeing a giant tarpon in the water, 40 feet away, swimming over a beautiful white sandbar, or maybe 100 of them together.
Yeah.
Talk about buck fever, right? So, one of the biggest and funnest parts of the day, for sure, is a lot of the anglers don't live in Florida or the Keys that go fishing. Some of them might have a house here and do it a little bit more than others, but most of the people come down from Colorado, out west, and all over the country, and Canada, and everywhere around the world, actually. And a lot of the times they're based in areas where they go trout fishing a lot. So the world famous trout set seems to come in more often than not. It's an automatic response that anglers have, even when they're fishing for bonefish and permit. But most of the time when they see the tarpon come up behind the fly and then eat the fly, they react visually, and usually when they do that, they'll raise their rod tip and trout set. Well, if you have a picture tarpon, the bottom jaw of the tarpon's mouth closes up over the top of its mouth. So if you're on a boat on the bow up high, especially if you're on a casting platform, or even a little higher yet on the front of the boat, and you're stripping your line, you're at an angle that when that fish eats the fly and closes his mouth over the fly, and you lift your rod, it's a perfect angle to literally pull the fly right out of his mouth, right between his lips. Out it comes, right? Whereas if you were to just strip straight and keep stripping until you pull the fly tight into the fish's mouth and then set the hook that way, it's really a big difference. So a big joke we have on the boat all the time is when the guy lifts the rod, pulls a trout set on the tarpon, he sees it. It's all happening right in front of you. You go, oh my gosh. And I'm like, George, you got the fly out of there just in time. If you would have left it there another second, we would have had to fight that thing. Oh my gosh, good job, buddy. It's always a lot of fun. But on the other hand, the guys are frustrated because they did that. But on the other hand, too, they usually don't do that unless they are visually connected to what happened there, and they usually have a memory that they'll never forget. Like, oh my gosh, you see how giant the fish was and came right up and ate the fly. So here's something for everybody to think about. If you have your leader, a 12-foot long tarpon leader, and a tarpon fly at the end of the leader with, like, say, a 1/0 hook on the end, and you lay it across an old, rickety, bumpy wooden picnic table, and your job or your goal is to actually strip that fly and get it stuck and set the hook into the picnic table. Okay? So imagine it just laying across the picnic table, all to your leader, and then at the far end of the picnic table is your fly laying on the table. If you strip it really quick right away from being sit still, you're probably going to rip the fly across the top, and it's not going to give the chance for the hook to grab anywhere. Okay? Whereas if you strip long, slow, and steady, pulling the hook, letting it bounce and move and curl slowly around the different edges of the wood, finally it's going to grab. And when it grabs, then you can set the hook. But you can't set the hook until you grab. And what happens a lot of times is the visual aspect of tarpon fishing is so awesome that it actually creates more problems because the angler can see everything and he reacts visually versus physically. So if you can strip the fly when you see the tarpon eat the fly, just keep stripping until you can come tight to the fly and the fish's mouth. So imagine the tarpon coming up, eating the fly. He closes his mouth and he pinches his lips against the leader. Well, the fish's mouth is really big and the fly is just dangling around inside the fish's mouth at this point, and the leader is tight against his lips. So you want to strip tight so the hook comes tight to something inside the fish's mouth. Mm-hmm. Then once you're tight, then you can set the hook. Otherwise, if you try to set the hook without feeling him via moving the rod or even stripping too hard and too quick right away before you feel him trying to set the hook, you're going to just pull the fly right out of his mouth and you're going to miss him. It's part of the game. It's still going to happen, but at least if you're introduced to these kind of steps right now, you'll know what to look for and maybe can try to introduce it into your experience level as soon as you can and take advantage of any fish that you get to take immediately. Now, a lot of times tarpon too will also take the fly and they'll turn. And when they do that, there's little you can do wrong. But you don't, what I've learned over the years is that you might not necessarily want to strip really hard against the fish when they eat it and turn to set the hook. You almost want to just kind of let them turn, let them come tight to the fly, have steady pressure, but not too much, and let them take line as you keep that steady pressure on. And the reason why is this. When you land a tarpon, 90% of the time, the fly is in one of two spots. One on the upper lip, where the mono of the hook is over the top of its lip and it's not abraded at all. Or two, if you're to open your own mouth and you can push your index finger along your cheek, when you open your mouth wide and push your cheek can go in between your teeth, right, with your finger. Well, that area right there in the cheek on the tarpon, when they have their mouth open, if you're lucky enough to get a hook set there, there's soft cartilage there. It's easy to get a grab and a good meat filling hook set with that section right there. If you're able to hook there, you're going to land the fish almost all the time. And the main thing is that you're not allowing, you're getting into meat where the hook can stay in the meat, where the barb can hold it in, versus getting stuck anywhere else in the mouth where there is a lot of bone. And I don't care if you're the biggest, strongest guy in the world, you are not stripping hard enough ever to penetrate the bone and the crusher of the tarpon's throat. So when they eat and you strip really hard against that, right away, you really don't have much control as to where the hook's going to grab. And most of the time, since 80% of the fish's mouth is hard bone, you're probably going to get bone. And that's why when they jump right away, 1, 2, or 3 times, they throw the hook almost all the time. Very, very common. But what we've learned over the years that is if they, especially if they turn, if you don't set the hook really aggressively, but just stay tight, where you're enough to stay tight, but you're not enough to try to force that hook into any bone, it will slide across the bone because you're not putting enough pressure on there. You're staying tight, but not enough to stick it, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Then it slides in the fish's mouth to one of the soft spots, and then it's game on, and your odds go through the roof. So there is definitely some technique of different ways the fish eat fly and how you can set the hook that will increase your odds of getting a fish to the boat for sure. Awesome,
Bruce. Super cool. Ton of knowledge there, buddy. Ton of good stuff. What do you got going on for us really quickly? What do you got going on for this year? Anything you can share with what you guys are doing personally down there?
Well, in the Keys, I'll be fishing here until mid-November, and then I'm going to do a fun little trout fishing trip up into the Smoky Mountains. I love going trout fishing. Mm-hmm. There's usually leaves changing that time of year. It'll be great. And we're hoping to put a trip together to go to the Baja and get some roosters. So, yeah, exciting plans coming up. But hopefully, COVID won't won't get in the way.
Yeah, I'm hoping the same thing, as many millions are as well. So Bruce, let's put it like this: if someone wanted to reach out to you, talk about your trip, ask you more tarpon or line questions, or just anything in general, where can they find you at?
Sure, you can go to brucechard.com, and my email address and phone number is right there. You can give me a call, you can text me, you can email me at brucechardflyfishing@gmail.com. I'm usually really eager and happy to talk to anybody. So please reach out. If you got any questions, let me know, and I'd be happy to talk.
You bet. We're going to put all those details within the show notes for the listeners. And Bruce, I want to thank you. Listeners, I want to thank you. You guys have been listening to Guided. You've been listening to the Guided Podcast, sponsored by Scientific Anglers. If you like this podcast episode, please let us know and leave a review on your favorite podcast listening platform. And remember, subscribe to the Fly Fishing Insider podcast to get even more episodes of both Guided and the Fly Fishing Insider each week. See more at flyfishinginsiderpodcast.com.